On this episode of Athletic Training Chat, we have Katie Lee, who is a doctoral student at Baylor University, where she also works with the acrobatics team. And we talk about the acrobatics. That's the second part of the podcast if you're wanting to jump up to that. But we really focus on talking about staff wellness and burnout, which is the focus of her dissertation that she's just getting started on. We talk about Katie's personal experiences with it when she worked in a Division I institution, especially COVID, which I think a lot of people can relate to, and what that did to people and just the demands physically and emotionally and psychologically. And then we also talk about how it relates to caffeine and caffeine intake, and she tells her own story, and we don't get into mine, but yes, I think most of us could talk about how that is very much a hot topic and something that is common within the profession. So we really talk about that, kind of some different thoughts that have been out there in different professions and what she is hoping to do with it within the athletic training profession. So it's a really great conversation and really insightful when it comes to the topic of staff wellness and burnout. Looking forward to the research when she gets to that point in the process. Speaking of staff wellness and burnout, do you need extra support but don't necessarily have the budget to hire another staff member because it's just not a good enough pay or whatever it may be? You may be interested in Wave On Health, fully back-end addition to your staff to help provide access to your student athletes or your patients with people that can help them and triage a lot of what's going on to then get it back to you as needed. So check out Wave On Health. Let them know you heard about it from the AT Chat podcast and see if it is a solution for you. As always, we are powered by Mueller Sports Medicine, and we thank them for helping keep this podcast going. But without further ado, please enjoy this episode. Well, welcome to this episode of Athletic Training Chat. We are on with Katie Lee, who is a doctoral student at Baylor down in Texas, and we are talking staff wellness and burnout, which will tie into her work within Baylor there, but also acrobatics, which I've seen more recently getting added as sports at more and more institutions. Connected via the wonderful world of social media, just reaching out, touching base, and then caught a couple things in her bio, specifically the khaki connoisseur, which everybody I feel like within the AT profession can relate to in some form or fashion. But before we kind of jump in to start talking about the staff wellness and burnout, huge topic, really excited to see what you've come across so far, and then also what you're planning to do. But if you would want to just introduce yourself and kind of fill in some background.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm born and raised in Cleveland, Ohio. So I grew up there my whole life. And then obviously as an Ohioan, I was going to end up in Columbus. So I did my undergrad down at Ohio State, if I'm going to be correct. So I learned a lot there and it was a good experience for me. And then I actually moved down to Chapel Hill. So I did my master's down at North Carolina, and I had the opportunity to work with women's soccer there and women's tennis, both, big learning opportunities and successful programs that were fun to be a part of for a few years. Really thought I wanted to go back to the Midwest and really wanted to go back to Ohio. So I moved back up there and worked at the University of Mount Union for a year before I realized it's cold still up there.
Yes.
So I moved back to the South, way down. And so I was in Mississippi for a couple of years working in Starkville. And then now I'm over here at Baylor. So it's been nice. Connections from school brought me over here and helped me get here. And so it's been a very good time. So while I'm here, I'm a doctoral candidate now officially. I've passed my comps.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And now it's just working on my dissertation. And then while I'm here, my assistantship has me working in athletics. And so I assist them primarily with acrobatics and tumbling, which has been a huge learning curve, but a really fun learning curve to be a part of.
And I'm excited to get into that too, and some of the nuances of it, just having been around gymnastics in my world, but not those. So I will save that for when we get there. I know when we were going back and forth, talking about, a topic that you wanted to cover And this topic, which is ultimately now your dissertation work, as you're really getting into it, is on staff wellness and burnout. And for anybody who's listening who isn't always following AT social media in the world, um, this topic has kind of come up, but I know me being a D3 for a lot of my career, it was actually like a full on topic at the D3 convention just a couple weeks ago, and we're recording this at the end of January, where they basically are like, well, people just don't want to get paid like crap and work a lot of hours in D3, which obviously seems simple to figure out, but hey, it's the first time I think somebody at that level has actually said it, so it's a step. But um, I'll just first, if you want to give kind of an overview of what brought you to this, and then we can kind of dive into some of the definitions and uh, other things around it.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. The first time I had never heard anyone through school talk about burnout, what it is, what's an issue. Frankly, when I was going through school, we didn't really speak about mental health or well-being outside of the student athletes. There was never really a
Sure.
focus on that in yourself, in the athletics department and the staff. And I got to my master's degree, and it was starting to kind of come into fruition a little bit to be a topic. It was the first time I kind of looked into it for a class project, and realizing sitting there like, oh no, this I've seen this. I've worked with people and I've witnessed this happen with my own eyes with very good clinicians who are just struggling with everything. And then for me, it became very personal during COVID. So I was working in Mississippi at the time. I was working soccer. Um, and it was a grind. The SEC split the soccer season. So we were in season basically from August to May. Um, just just beat you down, especially working, with groups and being over there early days, sanitizing soccer balls at the end of every day, and managing testing and all the other things that went with working during COVID, and then working in that type of environment during COVID.
Sure.
And it just wore on you. It's just took people down, and all of a sudden you were like, I am unwell. And so it was an interesting time, I think, that really brought me there. And it loops into my dissertation, which is on staff wellness and burnout and caffeine as the solution to that. Because when I think back, and I tell people all the time, when I think back to working during that time, like fall of 2020, spring of 2021, I would like get up on a game day and go through a Starbucks and get 4 shots of espresso in a venti cup over ice, and then steal a protein shake from the fueling station. And that was like how I survived a day. And looking back, I'm like, oh, that was not good. That's not my best moment. Uh,
Sure.
and so just watching that and seeing what those extra responsibilities on, my coworkers and myself did, and really bring it. And I mean, obviously at the end of the spring of 2021, I left being a full-time Division I athletic trainer to go back to school and to make a career change that, I thought I would make eventually, but I wasn't sure that I was going to do it after whatever it was 6 years practicing.
Sure.
Um, but a perfect storm of a horrific year to work, and the right opportunity coming about. So it's been interesting, and it's really brought my attention around full circle to it. And it's been really interesting to see, even in the last 3 years since I've been here, what a topic it's become and how a focus it is.
Totally agree with you. I know when I was in the kind of director level, it was a D3 school, which the Mount Union you're at was the D3. Okay, that we only know of it as Mount Union in the D3 world, not the University of. So
Yes.
I
Now you
wanted to
did
double
play
check.
football.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Um, and we were very fortunate where I was. We had a big staff, and that made things really nice. And it was always the goal of mine to obviously add to that staff, but the goal was always making it sustainable, not survivable. And that, I don't think it would have been awesome to get to the one AT to one sport, but just knew it wasn't going to happen in the D3 realm. So if we could make it where it was one AT with two sports, obviously opposite seasons, maybe you only travel with one of them. So, there is ways to downtime. And then as a staff, we cover big events together, kind of cover each other's back.
And I think that was always our goal, again, that not making it so you're just surviving and figuring out how to get through, but to actually make it sustainable to keep people there through family changes, marriages, kids, all these things that it makes it is tough in the profession given the schedule, but if you can maybe make it that way. So yeah, I understand that. And COVID had an impact. Same thing there too. And coverage models versus care models and all kinds of fun things. But just to start off, if you could define burnout and staff wellness and kind of the difference and then how they play together.
Yeah, so staff wellness really very straightforward. It's just like the overall well-being of your staff on an individual and a holistic level. So how is their health and well-being physically, mentally, emotionally? How are they doing? How can you support that? Burnout is an interesting one. Really, in summary, it's breaking down into a stress syndrome that develops from the interpersonal stress you're facing at work every day. So you see it in people that are working in people-facing professions. So it's been looked at a
Sure.
lot in physicians and social workers and nurses and people like that that have this constant interpersonal interaction all day long. And basically what is happening is that just tests you. It just runs down your physical and your mental resources to be able to continue to really deal with somebody else's problems all day. And then when you start to lose the ability to deal with somebody else's problems because you've blown through your resources for the day, you no longer have nothing left to manage your own issues throughout the day. And so the big central component of it is fatigue or emotional exhaustion. You're just beat down. And then as you continue to power through it, because people in people facing professions are just going to keep powering through it, it starts to develop into this depersonalization issue. So people are not people anymore. People are just their problems. It's not my student athlete. It's the ACL tear that I have to deal with today, or
Sure.
the case may be. And then you just continue down this cycle, eventually ending up in this like decreased sense of personal efficacy. Like I am bad at my job because now I can't provide the best level of care and I am failing at helping my patient or helping my student athlete succeed because I'm so beat down, so worn down. And this becomes this cyclical issue.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I got nothing else on that. How
Yeah.
prevalent have you found burnout in the just have to assume, especially because you're through your comp exams, you've done plenty of reading specifically to your topic. But within the athletic department setting, ATs, and then I know you made notes about some others as well. I see on social media every once in a while, go check on your SID. They're probably not okay. Uh, knowing this is similar to the guy we had. Um, yeah, just one. It was almost like one and a half people trying to cover every single event, plus posting on away ones as well. How? No idea. But what have you seen for prevalence and the commonality, I guess, of it?
Yeah, I mean the numbers are kind of all over the place. It depends a lot on the specific sample and whatnot. But I think more of the important piece it pulls out is that like a lot of the literature finds that a lot of athletic trainers in these different settings are experiencing at least a moderate level of burnout. Um, and I think it's some interesting discussion within the literature as well about people not necessarily knowing that you are experiencing burnout until someone has pointed out the symptoms. Like you
Sure.
just like, I'm just grinding. This is my job. I don't know any better. Um, and then all of a sudden you don't know what's happening. But I think what was interesting is they found it in all different professionals within athletic training. So they've seen it in directors, in educators, in GAs, in full-time staff, in students, in the collegiate setting, in the secondary school setting. It's, people haven't really looked much in a physician office setting or in a public safety setting or a military setting because they're still so relatively emerging that I don't think anyone's really dug into what it looks like in those settings as much,
Sure.
besides the fact that those are settings that tend to have better work-life balance, but also could have more emotional toll depending on the interpersonal interactions that you're having, or a very different set of emotional tolls than the traditional setting does. So it's definitely out there, and we're trying to figure it out. I think the interesting part for me is that no one knows what it looks like in the rest of athletics. It's pretty much almost exclusively athletic trainers, athletes, which is important to know,
Yep.
and
Sure.
coaches. All important to know, but no one, like I said, SIDs' lives can be miserable. They are pulled in so many directions and doing so many things, and after a game they're trying to write up things. It's a mess. I don't know how they do it. I don't know how one person does all the things that they're able to do. So no one knows what it looks like for an SID or a dietitian who's having to be at meal checks every day, or the strength and conditioning coach that's got a lift group at 6 a.m. and one at 6 p.m., or any of these people's in the creatives or the business office. Like, they're all in these constantly people facing professions for the most part, whether they're clients or they're student athletes or other people they're reporting to, that are just also in this grind all day. It's the grind of college athletics, but no one has any idea what's happening over there. And you see turnover in those departments just like you do in our department. But there seems to be less of a focus on looking at it in those departments specifically. So I'm trying to get a better understanding to support administration to say, this is how you need to support your whole staff. Everybody needs some help.
Agreed there. This wasn't a question we had pre-planned, and it either if you've come across anything or just kind of your own perspective on it, but you kind of mentioned, people with like, oh, I'm on my grind, and some people embrace that, and that's like badge of honor. Can burnout, and I would assume it would be defined by the different person because in their situation, because I remember being 27, got my head AT job, like no wife, no kids, had a dog that slept 20 of the 24 hours of the day, so he was good for the most part. And so it was like, oh yeah, I can put in the extra time, and it is, and you want to make a splash, and then priorities change and that doesn't work out as well, and type of a thing. And I always, it's hard to compare anything apples to apples because everybody's circumstances are different. Does anything along burnout come out with that where it's kind of comparing people's perspective on it, I guess?
A little
Or your
bit. So,
thoughts?
because in my head, if I was going to go, yeah, I would say the younger person that's 26 and has no commitments, young, unattached, should be able to power through, right?
What's a 60-hour work week? Unless you've got other things you really want to go do.
Right. But what I think, especially when I was getting deep in looking at my comp stuff, is that they've actually found, not so much in athletic training, but more in looking at physicians. There's just
Sure.
a larger breadth of knowledge, but looking at the fact that people that are older and have spouses and kids tend to do better because they have something outside of work that is like, I have to go home from work and I have to leave work at work,
Yep.
or it's going to negatively impact family dynamics. And then, as well as, you can't look past, generally older people farther along in their career also tend to be in more supervisory roles. So they may be putting in less of the grind because the supervisor, but they're also been in it longer. But also a lot of times it's a self-elimination thing, is that people that are incredibly burnt out at 27 don't make it that far.
Right.
And they bail well before they're, in their 50s and still doing it.
Makes sense. Where does caffeine play a role in all of this, in burnout and work volume, other than it's it's a favorite of a lot of people? You mentioned your specific example. I feel like most AT rooms, if the people are into it, have a coffee pot, if not other forms of caffeine. But how does that fit into this whole picture?
Yeah. So obviously, like, the main component of burnout is that exhaustion or fatigue piece. And we know that caffeine is, a known method for dealing with fatigue in general.
Yep.
But shockingly, despite that, what appears to be a very straightforward line, no one's actually drawn that line in the literature. Like, no one has looked, it's just been an assumption.
Sure.
And so there's single digits numbers of studies that we've been able to find looking at that relationship, and they're all very, very loose and looking at a lot of different things. So that's my goal, is to look at like a large scale sample and figure out like what's happening with that relationship. Because anecdotally, on a personal level, I know that I was pounding caffeine when I was my most burnt out, but you also see it around you all the time and what's happening. And no one questions excessive caffeine use in athletics.
No,
Ever.
no,
Like, we might give the speech to the student athlete, but the SID that's drinking a Celsius down the hallway while we're giving the speech. So it's there. We know it's there, but we don't have any science that says that it's there. So that's the goal with all of this, is to be able to draw that line that exists in theory but hasn't been substantiated. Because in my goal down the line, next steps would be to look at what are the impacts of the addictive nature and withdrawal of caffeine.
sure,
So if I need caffeine to do my job and then I spill my coffee that morning, or I'm not able to get caffeine or have to stop consuming caffeine, does it negatively impact my job performance or
yeah.
my life or anything like that? And understanding how that next level plays into it.
Any other coping mechanisms that you came across other than caffeine? I know your focus is on caffeine, but just in reviewing stuff, I know personal, again, anecdotal, like long day. You know what? We're just gonna go get, throw in a pizza. Like it's probably not the thing I need, but it's definitely the thing I want to deal with the fact that my day was what it was.
Yeah. Yeah, looking through some of it, there's a couple of things that I've looked at, like dietary habits and
Yeah,
exercise habits and other substance use habits, which gets into a tough area because no one's really ever going to admit illicit substance use or
sure.
anything of the sort. But like, so there's a good amount looking at alcohol
Yep.
and different things that have all looked at that all have their own issues that go along with it, that people are using for the purposes of coping with the stress of this job. But none of it has a ton.
Interesting that it hasn't.
Yeah.
What best practices have you come across or are hoping to create, or have seen when it looks at caffeine and dealing with burnout, um, and some of the effects that all of that can have?
Yeah, it's actually been pretty interesting. We have started doing some research in the last year with we have a sleep lab on campus,
Oh, nice.
faculty that's come in and doing a lot of stuff on sleep and sleep health. So in the last year, we've started working with them on some research, looking mostly at student athletes at this point, but through there, it's been very interesting to learn a lot more about those types of recommendations coming from them and literature that I may not necessarily be deep in, but they're deep, deep in the weeds on.
Sure, sure.
Um, I think one of the postdocs said to me last week or a couple weeks ago that it was like, oh yeah, well, they recommend probably no caffeine after noon. And I said, no caffeine after noon. I wouldn't make it. There's like 8 hours left in my workday still. So there's a whole workday left after noon. Um, but it's the stuff and that's the worst part, is that it's all the things that you already know and know you should be doing. Avoiding caffeine late in the day, avoiding alcohol before you go to bed, avoiding high doses of caffeine, energy drinks, pre-workout, all of that. It's all things I know as a healthcare professional. Has it stopped me one bit? No. And so I think it's the education piece that's a bigger piece with people, and understanding the why I'm doing it and the consequences that it has,
Yep.
so that we can try and establish some recommendations from an administrative level of staff support to take the stress off from that level, to hopefully create some better habits and solutions. Because otherwise the things they've shown that are good for burnout are the ability to leave work at work. But I can't leave work at work. When someone's sick, it's always at like 9 p.m. There's no work at work, which is unfortunate. But the importance of social support is huge. And so having supportive coworkers, supportive supervisors, supportive administration, and the ability to feel autonomous and make your own decisions and be in charge of your schedule. A lot of those things all sound great, but they're not necessarily always applicable to this type of setting. And so it's trying to figure out how to support in other ways around that.
Yeah, I think that's the hardest thing with like D1, and was a huge reason for me in really enjoying the D3 realm is it wasn't the quote unquote concierge, medical care where, someone always available to help, especially at the D3 level, but like not every student athlete had my cell phone number. It was only given out when it was when I wanted to be in contact with them because there was a student health center on campus. We didn't have a team physician that was going to treat every sniffle and everything. And, if it was emergent, they're just going to go and they're going to take care of that. And we'll touch base with them. And that's so hard. And people have asked me if I'd ever go back to, D1. I said the amount of money that I'd have to be paid to be able to like make up for the time I'd lose to be able to go and do fun things or, have new experiences because I could afford it. It's probably unfortunately not going to line up. And that works for a lot of people, and that's awesome, and I'm glad it does. But yeah, that's a tough part there. And then to your points on the caffeine late in the day, I used to always get mad at people. That halftime of a evening football game, it's like you're never going to go to sleep, and like you may fall asleep, but
It's not going to be good.
they're pricey, and there's different things out there. I personally use the Aura Ring, and like I can have the most chill night ever, have a drink or two, and I'll sleep. But my heart rate is through the roof, HRV is down, like sleep score is trash, and it really impacts you. And it's hard to know that until you see it, because you wake up and you're like, oh, I slept 8 hours, but you still feel like crap and you just didn't recover. And I've got to imagine I don't try and do caffeine very late just because I just don't do it too much in the afternoon, but the half life of it is hours and hours, and you lose sight of that when you're just like, oh, it's just whatever, and then you throw a Red Bull with vodka, and you got the worst of both worlds when it comes to that.
Yeah, and I think that's where some of that I think in the next few years is going to be really interesting, looking at all the conference realignment pieces, and that's some of what we've started talking about with sleep is like,
Sure.
okay, right now you're trucking Rutgers to the West Coast or back, and the only way that those staff and student athletes are going to be able to cope with that is using substances to help sleep and to help go, and it's going to be a disaster.
It's gonna be tough. Yeah, I've always thought, baseball games, late night NBA games, like to even if you aren't using caffeine or anything else to get up for the game, to just be able to bring yourself back down after exerting that type of energy, you're not going to be there till 3, 4 in the morning, and then you're throwing yourself completely off for the rest of your day. So
Yeah, we traveled to Hawaii over in April this past year for work, and we were only there for 5 days. It's awful. Very great, very beautiful, very thankful to be in Hawaii. Coming back from Hawaii, tough.
tough, yes, yes. Anything else around burnout, uh, staff wellness that we didn't cover before we kind of shift over to the acrobatics and tumbling?
I don't think so. I think those are all my big soapboxes.
Nice, and rightfully so. All right, I mentioned it kind of in the beginning. I know gymnastics to a degree. I didn't directly work with them, but we had them and was around. And obviously, they got a bunch of different events. And acrobatics and tumbling seems like it would maybe just be part of the gymnastic event, i.e., the floor, maybe uh, vault-esque. But if you wouldn't mind just defining what's different about them.
Yeah, so I had no idea until I
Sure.
got here. So my mentor for my master's degree is now one in the admin here, and so she's my connection here for a few years.
Oh, okay.
I get her, I'm helping with this acrobatics and tumbling team, and I said, I have no idea what that is. Like, not one bit. So it's actually pretty interesting. So it's a combination of elements of gymnastics as well as competitive cheerleading. So that's where most of our kids come from, backgrounds of gymnastics, either artistic gymnastics or acrobatic gymnastics, or competitive cheer. So it
Okay.
consists of a couple different events. So they do tumble. like gymnastics, but instead of tumbling on a spring floor, they tumble on a dead floor. So it's just a 2-inch cheer mat rolled out on a gym floor.
Got it.
And then they do like solo passes as well as synced passes with multiple people. Then they do acrobatic lifts. So basically, they do acrobatic lifts and they do pyramids. Acros are 2 layers high, pyramids are 3 layers high.
Yeah.
But they're very different from a cheer. Like you picture a cheer pyramid, very different.
I assume that probably.
Very cool. I recommend anyone when they have a minute to go scroll through some Instagram videos and look and see what they're doing, because it's crazy, especially some of your higher level schools. So I'm really fortunate that Baylor is the best. They've won the last 8 national championships. Our coach is the best in the country. They're the best to work for, and they do the coolest things. A little terrifying to watch from a medical perspective. But they do some absolutely insane things in terms of their acrobatic lifts and their pyramids. But they also do tosses, as you see in cheer, but a little bit more controlled.
Okay.
And then at the very end, they do a team event, which is to music and kind of combines all of those different things. But it's a super, super cool sport that really my head coach helped basically to invent the sport. And the goal was really to be able to create opportunities for a lot of these young female athletes coming out of gymnastics backgrounds and cheer backgrounds that didn't have the opportunity to compete at a collegiate level just because gymnastics rosters are so small and cheer is not a varsity sport. To create opportunities for them to come and be collegiate athletes and be given that opportunity, because we carry a big roster. So it's been really fun to see the sport kind of come. And then 3-4 years ago now, it was officially put on the emerging sports for women's list from the NCAA. So
nice.
We are, I think right now, at least when I last looked, there are 55 programs across all the divisions or schools that are intending to start programs. And then once a certain number compete for a full season, the NCAA will officially take over championship management.
Nice.
And full-fledged run by the NCAA, which I think they're hoping is in the next year or two.
Awesome. You mentioned the terrifying part, which I can imagine, because even watching some gymnastics, I'm just like, what are we doing? Unique challenges or opportunities that you've come across working with this group?
Yeah, I think it's a twofold. One of the more interesting ones I think we came across was working in an emerging sport in general. My whole career in schooling, I worked in sports that have well-established rule books and well-established policies and all of these things that like 1 or 2 might change here or there, but it is well established how things are run and how things are done. But we were at a meet and we had a kid have a gnarly bloody nose, just from life. And, bled through a jersey. And so we're scrambling, trying to find, we didn't have a blood jersey because it's not on the equipment list to pack because you don't think about it until it happens. And so we're scrambling and we get a jersey on her and we're like, okay, so what are the blood rules? Because they were going to have to do a team event, which is 2 minutes long. So we're like, okay, what are the blood rules? If she starts bleeding in the middle of this, do they stop it? Like, what happens so we can be ready? And they were like, I don't think there is a rule. And we were like, oh, yeah, I guess the rule wouldn't need to be made or existed until it became a problem.
Right.
Hasn't been an issue yet in the last 15 years. So it doesn't exist yet. So things like that, that was very interesting to be like, okay, I guess we're gonna make our own rules. So it's like, here's a clean nose plug, put it into your shorts. If that one comes out, put the new one in, kick the other one off the mat. Like, we'll deal with it, whatever it takes. Like, we're
Jeez.
So it was stressful in the moment, but it's fun after the fact to look back and be like, yeah, what are the blood rules? I don't know.
Sure.
So that's been interesting for sure. But I think the injury piece has really been what's been interesting to be a part of. When I first got here, part of what the administrator wanted me to do as part of my research was to try and get an understanding of what their injury rates looked like. Because you can pull the big scale NCAA studies and see what the injury rates look like for every main sport under the sun. But that doesn't exist for a sport like this yet. And so that was kind of what I was directed towards doing. And we're still working towards that. Like there's just some methodological things that go into that in terms of tracking exposures and whatnot that make it
Yep.
hard. Because anecdotally in everyone's mind, it's high. Everyone's like, it's a high rate, high injury rate sport. But in the rough numbers, we were able to run over like a year and a half of data. It's not horrible. It was better than, women's lacrosse, who's way up there and closer to women's soccer and those types of things. And that's coming from one school and one school's experience. So it is a limited piece of information, but it was reassuring to say it's not as bad as it feels. Feels bad, but it's not as bad as it feels. But I think the weirder part is it's been the weird injuries. Right there, you get the ACL tears and the things that go, and ankle sprains and weird fractures and things that go with any high impact sport. But Achilles tendon ruptures are a huge problem, especially because they touch on the dead floor, so they don't have any spring give back to them. Just the eccentric load of trying to punch through just a 2-inch foam mat is tough. That was a tough one.
Yeah.
But I think that one was most interesting. We were averaging 2 to 3 Achilles a year, and I still hear these other teams are still averaging 2 to 3 Achilles tendon ruptures a year. And I think after my first year, we had 2 in like 2 weeks. We were like, man, that's tough. And we're going through, make the giant chart, right? Like what shoes were they wearing? What skill were they doing? What day of the week? All the things. Like, can we figure it out?
Yeah.
And we were like, we had nothing. We were just sitting there like dumbfounded. And
hard to pin down.
Yeah. One of our student athletes came in, she hopped on a table and she was like, isn't it weird that everyone that's torn their Achilles here has been a base? And we were like, because they have bases and tops.
Yeah.
And all of them tumble. And we were like, oh my gosh, oh, you're right. They all wear bases. And then start working through that, they might only tumble 2 days a week. And on the days they're not tumbling, the tops are still getting impact because they're still coming down from the top. They're still repeatedly landing from 6, 8 feet in the air. On the days they're not tumbling, the bases are doing no impact activity.
Makes sense.
And it was like, oh, they are all bases. So we worked with the strength staff and started implementing, some plyo stuff into their team warm up every day and into the weight room, and knock on wood, have done really well.
Sure.
And it's like, oh man, it was that one thing and went right over our heads because we were looking too minute detail and not big picture.
Right.
Until it took a 21-year-old kid to be like, isn't that weird? We're like, that is weird. But so stuff like that. And then they get a lot of weird. I didn't know that it was common to get a fibular stress fracture. It is in this sport.
I could see it just with the landing and, the different stresses going through. I can see it.
Yeah. So we've kind of worked through that. A lot of fibular stress fractures, a lot of metacarpal stress fractures, and a lot of forearm splints. So it's been interesting trying to come up with management techniques for all of that and
I believe it.
kind of figuring things out on the fly, but it's challenging in a fun way.
It's awesome, especially like you said, kind of with a new and upcoming thing where you're trying to take a lot of best things of a lot of worlds and trying to put it all together.
Yep. So it's huge learning opportunity. That's been fun and challenging in all the best ways, and been interesting to kind of create a community of other acro athletic trainers and who's around. And I've connected with some on social media that I'll get a text from and be like, we are really struggling with this one thing. What do you do for X, Y, or Z? And we're kind of able to work through it. Or, we have another program down the road who takes some of our MAT students as sites over there. And their students will come back and ask me and my coworker here and be like, what do you guys do for a fibular stress fracture? How are you guys managing it? How are you doing? And so able to kind of work together as a group of people working in a small environment to figure out a challenging sport has been fun.
Sounds like a good place to be, especially on the early side of it all.
Ryan.
Anything else around acrobatics and tumbling that we didn't cover? I just learned a lot that I never knew before. So,
No, I think people shouldn't be afraid of it. It's really fun. It sounds really scary, and that it's something that I think schools or people may want to steer away from, but it's a really good opportunity for female athletes coming from backgrounds they might not normally have at this level, and to do some really cool things. And I can't stress enough, everyone when they're bored should go look up, you know, Baylor's Instagram account, Oregon, Quinnipiac, Presbyterian, UMHB, all these giant schools and small schools that just are doing the craziest things every day. It's been really, you'll be mind blown.
I can only imagine. Being built how I am, nothing about me flies through the air or would. So watching people do it is just envious and fascinating.
Yeah, they do for Big 12 Mental Health Awareness Week. It's always in the spring. And so they have the staff, like all the support staff, do an acro at basically halftime of a meet.
Oh,
And
geez.
you're like, I'm literally like standing there and like holding a foot, and I'm like, oh, pressure's on. I'm not qualified to do this. Trying like not to drop our administrator.
You're right, right. Yeah. Oh, yeah. There's plenty of pressure being the one flying, but also the one supporting.
Yeah. Ugh,
Ready for the AT chat questions?
absolutely.
Where do you see AT going in the next 5 to 10 years?
I think it's an interesting time. I think we're in obviously a massive transition period right
For
now.
sure.
Uh, and it was interesting going through schooling in the period of time where that decision was being made. Because I went to school in undergrad from a guy who was big in the Katie and a big part of that. And then I worked with some people in my master's degree that had opposite opinions. And so it was interesting to see both sides as a student and kind of going through. So it's interesting. I mean, I think there's a lot of opportunity for growth. I think there's going to be a lot of shaking up that happens in the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah.
That's just going to have to happen. I think primarily is that you're not going to have kids coming out of school with years of experience at the GA. And so how are you going to manage that? But I also think that this new generation of athletic trainers that are coming out are demanding better. And it's going to make things better for the profession as a whole. But I think we're in the tumultuous period right now of people demanding better and people not being ready to meet those demands yet.
Yeah,
That
I think it's going to be that 5 to 10 years before we truly know how this is all going to play out. I see some chatter every once in a while of like, oh, is it really the way we were wanting to? I mean, was it just a year or two ago? Like, it was when the undergrads had to officially be like done accepting. Like, it's only been a couple of years. I think it's way too early to make any direct correlations or outcomes of what it is. But yeah, I totally agree with you that it's a weird time now, and we'll see that kind of take shape again. Like we were saying, the NCAA recognized it. Does that change anything? I don't know. We'll see. But again, they never
step
said
one.
anything about it before. So
And so I think it's been interesting. I think the opportunity for a bunch of new settings is going to start to open up, and a lot of more non-traditional things are going to set up. Like I know if I hadn't come and done this, the other thing that really had my interest was the public safety setting. I am
yep.
the daughter of a retired police officer for 25 years, and seeing that and getting into that setting and creating more opportunities there to try and take care of populations that need it, and also working through being able to go to a city and say, look, I can save you so many thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars every year.
Yep.
And you pay me substantially less than that. And starting to really open those doors not only is going to open the doors for new settings and jobs, but also for other people to figure out what an athletic trainer is and what they do. Because I feel like we're still fighting that battle a little bit.
And probably always will. What advice would you give yourself as a young athletic trainer? And when in your AT life would you go back and give it?
Yeah, I I will fully admit to being a little bit of a perfectionist. If you're gonna sign up to come do a PhD, like you gotta have you gotta have some type A in there. It is what it is. So it took me a long time to kind of figure out and be okay with being wrong. And understanding that, especially going into my GA and feeling like you needed to have the answer and not feeling great if you miss a diagnosis or whatever the
Sure.
case may be. And so I help teach in the MAT program here now. And one of the things I try and stress them the most is like your diagnosis doesn't have to be right. If you can get the right problems list and figure out what is wrong, as long as you're not missing a bone pointing the wrong direction, like you can still help your patient and you can still get them better and keep them going without necessarily knowing if it's a grade 1+ or a grade 2 sprain. Like you can still treat your patient appropriately by understanding that, like, okay, they have this range of motion restriction or their strength deficit is here, and being able to use that to form your goals and decisions is substantially more important than having the diagnosis exactly right.
Yep, your first eval might not be your best eval. Lesson learned the hard way many, many times.
Many times. I get humbled on a regular basis.
Right. What has been the most influential resource that you have found in your career?
Yeah, without a doubt, it's been the community of athletic trainers and other support staff. I couldn't have done any of it. I've said my mentor is the one who got me here.
Yep.
Um, and she's on the athletic side. And so when they were looking for a doc student, she called me and said, "Hey, they're looking for a doc student. Do you want to come do this?" And she's helped me get every job I've had since I left North Carolina. And just even now, students that I've taught in the past that reach out to me and help them for things on that direct level. But I think back that athletic training is a team, it's a team sport. And it's really hard to do it on an island. And so the ability to call up another athletic trainer or your strength coach or your dietitian or mental health, or I've had to ask the SID for things or whatever the case may be, being able to use that in that setting. I think back to my time at Mississippi State, and we were frankly like a bunch of 27-year-old kids, really, all a bunch of young clinicians working in this building together. And it was all of us and then our like admin. So it was this high admin and then a bunch of 27-year-old kids running the show. And so it was sink or swim together. And hey, I'm struggling with this. What are your thoughts? I have X, Y, and Z. And a lot of brains is better than one.
For
And
sure.
so what's around you, but then being able to connect across the country and going to conferences or getting involved or things. I still talk to people to this day that I met through student senate work I did as an athletic training student. Um, I worked with the husband of a girl I was on student senate with when I was in Mississippi or things like that. And there's still people I call to ask advice, to do whatever it may be. It was a thing I was told as a student, right? You hear all the time, it's about who you know and your
Yeah.
relationships and
Yeah.
things. And that it's not real until it's real.
For sure. Very curious about your take on this one, just given the context of this conversation. As an AT in your role, how do you take care of yourself?
Yeah. I mean, we talked about my personal story that got me here and where I am. Was not taking care of myself that really influenced me in a career change and a life plan change, and as well as my research interests that I've committed 4 years to focusing on now.
Yeah.
So my focus now has really been to take care of myself in the best ways that I can. I was never really good at saying no, and I think a lot of athletic trainers are very bad at saying no. Um, and my boss that I followed here is the first person that ever said, "You got to learn how to say no." And I was like, I don't know, I'm a little uncomfortable with that. But now I've tried to grow into being more comfortable with saying no and trying to set boundaries, but also trying to leave work at work as much as possible. A lot easier when you're not a student, but
Sure.
but taking time away. Over Christmas break, I traveled for 3 weeks and I left the country, which is a little stressful at the time, but to be able to completely step away was was big for me kind of going into this next chunk
Yeah.
and just trying to be aware and not fall into the old habits that I had a few years ago that really took me down.
I understand that fully. One of my favorite ones around no, I don't remember who taught me this, but is no is both an answer and an explanation. And
Yeah.
you can just leave it at that, which has been useful several times of just being like, nope, and that was it, and walked away and didn't dig myself a hole.
Yeah, I as a GA especially, like, you're young and you're figuring it out, and I used to struggle with how to motivate kids that weren't motivated or how to get kids to care, and my boss there came by one day and all the GAs were just not having it, and he was like, "You guys can't care more than they care, like, you already care a lot, but you
Yep,
can't make them care anymore, and you can't let it dictate your life."
for sure.
And which
Totally agree.
think was a tough lesson to learn, and sometimes I'm still like, "No, please care a little bit more. Just a little bit more." That has been huge.
Absolutely. If you could change one thing, could be a modality, a common practice, a mindset, or anything of your choosing in athletic training, what would it be?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me, and I think we're really working towards changing it, is the slapping stim on it and we're gonna move on type of fix, which exists, and I think, honestly, my academic advisor here puts it the best way to our students all the time, which is that you can't fix a problem that happened actively, passively. So if something happened actively, which they do because they're active individuals,
Yep,
you can't fix it passively. You have to, you can't stim and grass and massage everything back into all better. And so trying to stress that to my students, my student athletes, the other people I work with has been kind of my goal and how I aim to manage my own clinical practice and to try and step away from the putting a band-aid on things mindset. Obviously, not always a fix, right? There are certain things that we're going to put a band-aid on,
for sure. No, absolutely.
whatever, but there's still things that you can be doing to try and take care of you, try and keep you good, try and keep you healthy. Because and the thing I try and stress to my student athletes that I think they don't always get, because a lot of times they're 18-year-old kids, is that I really want you to keep playing your sport, but I also want you to be able to pick up your kid in 15 years.
Right, right.
Go on a run if you want to go on a run or whatever the case may be, and just not totally wreck yourself when we can do things to take care of you.
Agreed. Totally agree. What does being an athletic trainer mean to you?
Yeah, this one I struggled with a little bit, honestly.
It's a
And
big
I
question.
talked to a bunch of my athletic training friends, and I was like, it's tough because it means so much. Like at the same time, I'm like, oh, it's what I committed to doing for the rest of my life, even from an educational setting. But I think for me, it's, clinically, it's being a jack of all trades, coming from that side, is it's um being able to be a director and direct different spokes on the wheel and do what you need to do for your patients, no matter what setting you're in, like whether you're in a clinical physician office setting or traditional setting or public safety or industrial, you're still that person that's kind of directing traffic and being able to do that and manage and keep all the balls in the air. But I think personally it's it's all about the relationships you're able to form with your patients that just is so entirely different than the relationship that any other healthcare provider has
Sure.
with with their patient. I will fully admit to having cried on multiple return to play instances over my career. And I'm proud of it because no one else sees these kids day in and day out every single day, 7 days a week for months on end, with every bump in the road and every every success and every pitfall and everything that kind of goes into it. And I think that it's just a totally different world that doesn't make sense if you're not in it all the times. But it's clearly I love it.
Which is a good thing. It's a good thing. If people wanted to reach out to you, find you, follow you, what would be the best place for them to do so?
Yeah, probably the easiest place is on Twitter. Handle's just at @KLee_ATC. Probably the best bet.
Fair enough. Well, appreciate you taking the time. Really looking forward to, and we'll have to stay in touch. You know, once dissertation gets done, like it's going to be done in like a couple months. When it's all said and done, and you're getting to the point, would love to do a follow up, just kind of see what you came across, and everything from there. And maybe acrobatics and tumbling will be a sport by then as well, so it could be just kind of a full circle follow up. But would love to do a follow up to kind of see where you've come across with that really important work, and stay in touch in the future.
Absolutely appreciate it.
All right. Well, thank you for being on.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Athletic Training Chat with Katie Lee. I thought it was extremely enlightening talking about the burnout and obviously the use of caffeine, which most ATs, unless you don't drink caffeine, probably are used to, and won't fully divulge how much they actually intake. But I thought she provided some really good insight, and I can't wait to see what her research brings in the years to come. Also, the new sport of acrobatics sounds terrifying to me, but that's awesome that it's becoming much more prevalent, and athletic trainers are getting all on board to work it. As always, thank you to Mueller Sports Medicine for powering the podcast. We can't thank them enough. Make sure as it's getting closer to NATA and a lot of the other conferences throughout the country, you check them out for all your sports medicine needs. And as always, we are brought to you by the Athletic Training Daily Journal. The idea of journaling has been interesting to you, but you wanted something specific to you. We tried to create that with the Athletic Training Daily Journal. You can go to clinicalpress.org/shop to download a free 14-day sample, or you can just go ahead and go right to Amazon to buy the book. Talk about leadership, practice, reflection, growth, and just trying to tailor it to the profession. As always, thank you for listening, and we'll catch you next episode.